This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by NTT. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. And before we jump in with my media guests to talk about this week's news, I've got a couple of awesome folks here from NTT and NTT Research. I've got Vito and Kazu-san. Hi, how are you guys?
Hello.
Great.
Hey, good to see you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So, I've had both of you on the podcast before, and we've talked about what NTT and NTT Research does, and more importantly, about optical networks and optical compute. Today, I'd love to talk about some use cases. You have mentioned some really interesting things. And also, I would love to chat a little bit kind of like where we're at today in the near future. Like what are the use cases today, and what do you see use cases coming in the next couple of years? And for those of you wondering, what are we talking about on a mobile podcast? Well, networking is what makes our phones and our devices work, right? Right now, a lot of it is radio, communication. That's not going to go away. But there's a lot of compute that happens in the back end on the networking side and edge computing, things that let you use your apps more effectively to decrease latency. Those things need compute power, and power today is getting higher and higher. You see it all with like AI right now. We've got like the generative AI that's using a lot of compute power. We've got all kinds of technologies. So as these technologies evolve, we're just starting to use an incredible amount of power. And as you know, we have some climate change issues to deal with, and we need to really be aware of how much energy we use. So optical networks and optical compute are technologies that are going to kind of bulletproof us going forward into the future, right? That's basically what this is about, correct?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the next internet is going to have to be an internet that has high capacity at low power with near zero latency. And those are three combined requirements that today we can't do. And so we need to get to that point with photonics. Okay,
so you mentioned some interesting use cases there where I was pretty excited about. The first one I felt was really kind of hit home for me was esports, right? So you said that it's now being used in esports, or it's about to get used in esports. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, we've got some examples in Tokyo or in Japan with one of our subsidiaries there, where they're offering an all-photonics network to help drive esports in real time. And so while we may have esports today, it's very difficult to do it across long distances at near zero latency in order to be fair to all the players. And so rather than having to be in one place or having a single dedicated line, this allows esports to happen in a way that we just can't imagine today.
So is this purely networking right now, or actually starting to use some sort of edge compute at all? I believe you do have a test network in Japan right now, right?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Yes. So this one is that actually we just started the commercial service just about a month ago, only in Japan though. But this is, we call it All Photonics Network. And something to add to Vito's the comments. So this one really, shortened the latencies all the way to the basically, law of the physics from point A to point B needs some time, according to the law of physics. So still, depending upon the distance of each players, that there might be some difference in latencies. But a little bit of an important point here is that we can control that latencies to the points that everybody has equal latencies, no matter where you are as a part of the world. So that's something is, I believe, not other solutions can provide at the moment.
And that makes it fair in esports so that it doesn't depend on where you happen to be or if you're in a congested area versus a non-congested.
Right.
It levels the playing field so you can have a true competition without worrying about, am I going to get the latency I need to play?
Right. So you're telling me basically you've achieved as the lowest latency you could possibly get on a network, in practical terms, like today, because you're using optics throughout. And that enables some applications like esports that are immediately benefiting from this low latency, because obviously that's pretty critical, right?
Yep, absolutely. And again, that we can control network can control the equal latencies. Again, all of the participants of the particular esports.
Right. Is it so good that you can actually set an equal latency on everyone so that you can actually there's no favoritism in terms of
Correct.
response time, basically?
Yeah. Just to provide
Okay.
the background. That's exactly what we are trying to do. Yes.
And the more pervasive the all-photonic networks get, the more you can lower that bar for latency so that you get closer and closer to zero. But there are places where they're not going to have networks aren't going to get replaced overnight. So it's going to take some time. But we can prove that by doing this at one level and expanding it everywhere, you can start to manage the latency and then lower it as everyone gets on the photonics networks.
It's an aside real quick, but I was reading that the financial institutions in Wall Street used delays to kind of equalize the markets worldwide, right? And they're literally using coiled up networking wire right now to create latency in the network. So obviously with photonics, you're going to be able to first of all, you're going to be able to improve overall latency for financial transactions, but you'll be able to time it perfectly as well, right? Whereas now we're kind of, doing kind of this DIY, punk rock backyard approach, right? To this problem.
Yeah. For the financial ones that, I've seen that try to do that, those hedge fund transactions and stuff that try to, the same idea, provide an equal footing on the network side. But technically, there's a little bit of uncertainties on today's packet-based exchange network.
Okay.
But what we are looking for the future is all photonics network end-to-end, the all photonics direct connections. Then we don't have to deal with some of those uncertainties that exist on today's network, even on this financial exchange.
Right. And then in terms of other applications, I presume, I was talking to Verizon recently, and that's kind of fresh in my mind, how when they have large events in stadiums, what they've noticed is a lot of the people in the stadium are streaming the game to their Facebook friends or on Instagram or on TikTok or whatever live. And it's causing, of course, a huge, increase in upload bandwidth. And of course, they're prepared for that. They obviously use a millimeter wave. Verizon, that's their big thing in their stadiums. But more importantly, they have to create an entirely new low latency network architecture on the back end. Obviously, this is an area where you guys can make a huge inroads, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, everybody has to work together to make those things happen. And in a stadium environment, that the last mile, we call it, connected to your cell phone needs to be the wireless and then millimeter bandwidth and all that, the low latency technology to be implemented. But if the back end is that traditional old style telecommunications, that kind of defeats the whole purpose. So all the telecoms around the world needs to upgrade those infrastructures to support those requirements.
So right now, when you look at optical networks, right, you have basically a fiber coming in, and then you have some sort of this sensor that receives the pulses, right, and turns them into electricity, right? What we are trying to do here is actually take that light and do some operations with it, and then eventually transfer it into a data stream that's an electrical data stream, right? Because you need to interface with all the legacy technology out there. So how much of that compute or that even basic computation is happening optically right now on these networks, like maybe some protocol level type stuff?
So what we are trying to do is that the biggest key, technical speaking, is that in today's internet is that based upon the packet.
Yeah.
That information is put that in a thing called packet and then do the exchange based on the packet. Shoving the data into packet, it creates actually latency.
Right.
So our notion is try to eliminate that piece and then more direct communications from end to end as much as possible to, again, reduce this latencies being produced by that we call the packetizing process.
Right.
So that's the whole idea coming.
And is that happening today, or do you think that the only way forward is to create a new protocol that is more optimized for optics?
Yeah, we need to optimize this to the optical network. And the discussion is ongoing. Technically, it's possible, but because the communication we need good standardizations. So we are in the process of making it.
And that's what you guys are doing, right? Like this is one of the big point here is that you're trying to rally as many of the your players out there, whether they're in the networking field, in the server compute field, and even the consumer electronics field, because the sooner we can get this achieved, the more interconnection there be, the more efficiencies of scale, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we just held our semi-annual forum. It's called the IOWN Global Forum, and the IOWN Global Forum is about 118 partners in the industry, including all the communications partners, the equipment partners, whether it's Ciena or Cisco or VMware or NVIDIA, because all of these pieces have to be connected and standardized so that we can use these photonics across the whole network. We can't do it on our own. We have to do it with all these partners. So a lot of enthusiasm at the event. We had over 400 people there, and that was an invitation only, like members only event, and it was quite impactful. And we got lots of coverage as well from the press on it.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a question for you is, I've seen technologies come from, the business side, the infrastructure side, and seep into the consumer side, which is my audience is mostly consumer tech users. And I've seen the other way around too. I've seen some technologies kind of starting out in the consumer space and kind of getting adopted in the more infrastructure, server, business, commercial side. So one of the things I've always wondered, especially with companies like NVIDIA, of course, you can't speak for them, but how close do you think we are to, like on a gaming computer, for example, having some sort of optical interconnect between some of the parts, like the GPU and the CPU, for example, or memory? Obviously that, I'm thinking purely on the, not necessarily optical compute, just using some kind of interconnect that's just maybe a little faster, and gives you more predictable latency. And then, is it cost effective? Is it something we could potentially see in the next few years? And then, or will it start maybe more on the server side and eventually migrate to the consumer end? Where do you see this happening? Because I believe that, the network is so many parts to it, but it starts inside of our devices. It starts inside our phones, inside our computers, inside our own home network, and then it goes beyond, right? But it also starts outside of the network, like outside of our home network. It starts with the ISPs, with the CDNs, etc. So I'm trying to think,
chip makers,
if you have a feel for where do you think this is going to kind of come into play first?
Yeah, so I can chime on that. So as you mentioned, Miriam, I think that we call it disaggregated computing. That's what we call it from a technical perspective. So instead of stacking many servers, actually that's what's happening inside of the data centers. That stacking of the servers, well, that's the job. We can use the AI today and so on, but it has actually this inefficiencies in it, because all the servers has the same amount of GPU, CPU, memory, storage, and everything. But depending upon the applications that you are running, there might be some more CPU heavy, memory heavy, GPU heavy, and then some other things are light. So we can really organize these type of components within the data centers. And then by connecting them with the optical network, we can optimize that resource allocations for each applications. So that's what we are trying to achieve through this disaggregated computing. And then optical communications to connect each of that is a key ingredients to make it happen.
Right.
It's a bit technical there, but that's the kind of visions that a lot of people start looking at. And again, the standard to make it happen is very important, and then people start working on it. But to answer your question, Miriam, earlier, that where does this thing start? My kind of imagination was it has to come from the inside the data centers. Okay, and then that's definitely biggest need is there from the energy consumption's point of view and the resource, optimization's point of view and so on. And then once that technology is more matured, and then I think we can really take off all the rough edge, perhaps it will gradually moving into the edge and all the way to your PCs, and then phones, probably the desktop first, and then eventually to your cell phone. I don't know exactly how that works today, but that that's how the technology has been working in the past and for the last 20, 30 years.
Right.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
there's also a cost issue, right? It's expensive. And so
Right.
you want those economies of scale to apply to the lowest hanging fruit. Right now, edge compute and server-based farms, et cetera, is going to be probably the
Correct.
most effective. I figured that, but I thought, you never know. Sometimes some breakthrough happens.
Well, we aren't the edge creators. Qualcomm, Broadcom, and NVIDIA are part of IOWN Global Forum. So they're not exactly, avoiding this. They're looking into it. But as Kazuo says, we're not predicting when that can happen. but there has to be a point where we go from electronics to photonics, even on the edge device.
Right. Well, folks, any final thoughts you want to share with us?
So we didn't talk too much about the optical computing, but from the technology front that we are looking at that even potentially replacing GPU with the optical devices purely. It's not going to be ready in the next year or two or anything. We just look at the 5 years down the road. But the once that is done, we can get the much more energy efficiencies, and we can, you can run your game and your AI engines without heating our Mother Earth. So that's what that we are working on from the research front.
That's definitely what you're trying to achieve. I mean, to me, that's the holy grail. If we can achieve that, we've solved the whole, like generationally, we've solved the whole problem,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, correct.
Well, the one I mentioned once before was around entertainment and how can we make entertainment in real time remotely. So, for example, we had a case where in Tokyo to Osaka, we had a full orchestra with all the players in different locations playing a perfect symphony. You can't do that with today's networking. So again, what if we were to be able to do that? What does that mean to the entertainment business and the music industry and the live music industry? And how does that come across and changing the way people consume entertainment? That's a big change.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're going to be staying tuned with you folks about NTT's achievements. So thanks again for being on the podcast. Both of you, appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Well, that was a pretty interesting conversation with the folks at NTT. And now I have the awesome Anshel Sag here with me of More Insights and Strategy to talk about this week's reviews and news. Hi, Anshel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks a lot for having me again.
Well, I'm always happy to have you on because you always have some great thoughts on things. We're actually going to talk about some things that are not directly like phone related later on. Things about the Apple VR, XR, AR headset, and something about EVs as well, which I think is fascinating. But before we start, we do have a new phone this week that is a North American product. It's the new Moto Edge Plus 2023, and it's a flagship for $799 that actually doesn't suck. And I know I shouldn't say things like that because, we know Moto can make decent phones. It's just that they really haven't made a decent flagship like in 3 years. And certainly not one with this much value. You get 512 gigs of storage for this price, and it's only sold unlocked. No carrier partnership other than like a couple of little ones. I can't remember who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your take? Like, what's the value proposition you see here?
I think it's a challenging one. When you're not partnered with a carrier in the US, it's really hard to expect that you'll be shipping in any considerable volume. So I think this might be more of a retail play, but the reality is retail in the US is the carriers. So really this is a Best Buy play, and maybe that's it, because, I think that they may have to do some kind of marketing, but the reality is for the US market, if you're not with the carriers, it's much harder to get any kind of volume. And I just don't really know what they're trying to achieve by not being signed with any major carriers. But I just think that if they have a good phone and they're confident in it, they should have some kind of carrier deals lined up.
So here's my take on this. I know exactly what you're saying, and I agree 100%, except this is not the reality that we're in right now. The reality we're in right now is that nobody can really get in with the carriers without the carriers contaminating the product, unless you're Samsung or Apple, and Google maybe, because Google has so much Google just doesn't care if they make money, basically. I mean, they do, but they don't, So I think Moto, on the other hand, they're driven by Lenovo. They're a Chinese company. They want to make profits. They make a lot of profits on, frankly, crappy phones that are the Moto Gs now. The Moto Gs used to be great, but I don't think they're that compelling for the money anymore compared to what the Chinese are bringing to market in India and other parts of the world. So I feel like Moto, in some ways, has lost their way. But for a while, they were doing, still some flagships that were worthy. But every time they did them with Verizon, their long-time partner. Nothing wrong with having a long-time partner in the carrier business. But it was always a problem because it was only Verizon and it was an exclusive. So AT&T and T-Mo didn't get it, or Sprint at the time. And then it meant that, people, it wasn't like a Galaxy. You couldn't show it to your friend and your friend could go get it, right? So they started making phones for Verizon with Verizon's input. Instead of bringing their nice global models that were really high-end to North America, they would get Verizon's to have their hands on them, and it would go downhill from there. They started with a no-compromise product, the Moto Edge Plus, in 2020 at the beginning of COVID there, and it was a flop because it was too expensive and because it was only available on Verizon. So then the next 2 years, they gave us these crappy, plasticky, mid-range-ish, quote-unquote, flagships, which we didn't like. And we, the media, really, really banged on them about it. So I think the reality we're in today is that they're making an Audi R8. You know what I'm saying? It's a halo product. This is not a phone that's going to sell in numbers. It's a phone that exists because they want to show, hey, we are still in control. We can still make a flagship that's worth their name and sells at a good value price that competes with Samsung, with OnePlus, with Google. And some people will buy it and they will love it because it's not compromised, and they will spread the word, and it's a halo product. And I think that's exactly how we should look at it. There will be a Moto version of this phone called the Edge 2023 UW, whatever, 5G. And it will be not the Plus, and it will be completely decontented and corrupted and terrible. And it will sell in bucket loads at discount prices for the holidays. Trust me, that will happen. But in the meantime, this is what we have. And if you look at it on shelf, this is exactly almost the same as the Moto Edge 40 Pro in Europe, in global markets. They didn't have to create a new phone. They already had one. All they did is change two things. They reduced the charging speed from 125 watt to 68 watt, which I still think is very solid. More importantly, they increased the battery from something like 4,600 milliamp hours to 51. And I ran a battery life test on this. I didn't have time for my review, so I'm going to update the review. I got 21 hours on PC Mark III. Like, that is at the upper echelons of anything we've ever tested. So clearly that move for changing battery was worth it. And you don't get the 12 gig version here. You only get 8 gigs, but you get 512 gigs of storage for $799. At $799, the Galaxy S23 has 128 gig storage. The OnePlus 11 has 128 gig storage. You see where I'm going with this. Sure, you can bet a Pixel for cheaper, but it doesn't have a telephoto, and it, again, has 128 gigs of storage. So I think they're doing something right here.
Yeah, this almost sounds like it's a review fodder device where they're able to get great reviews for it and maybe help build up the brand a little bit. And then, with lesser volume products, push the brand through there.
100%. I mean, we've had lots of conversation, we the journalists, with Moto over the last 3 years about how disappointed we are with the Edge products in North America. And they finally listened. They said, look, we're just not even going to bother with the carriers. We're going to bring the whole, enchilada right over to North America with a few tweaks and make it really affordable. And they did. And honestly, the phone hits all the bright little tick marks. It's just great. It's a fantastic phone all around. The camera is even relatively decent, which for Moto is unexpected. And I think most of that stands on the shoulders of Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. They have that horizon lock thing. You can literally rotate the phone 360 degrees and get a perfectly flat horizon, either vertically or horizontally, in one of the modes. I tested it. It's spooky. It's perfect. You can do whatever you want with that phone, and it'll stay locked on that horizon like insane. But, in terms of camera performance, I would say it comes close to OnePlus 11, which is not bad for a Moto phone. Like it's at the lower echelons of a flagship in terms of imaging, but it still finally sits down at the same table, I think. It's only when you start to zoom in a lot that, because there's a 2x telephoto that's a 12 megapixel, although f/over 1.6 on that 12 megapixel telephoto, which is impressive. And that it starts getting crunchy at like 5x, 10x. They're not using any kind of high-res zoom like, other companies like Google are, and also not using the big sensor, that 50 megapixel main sensor for zooming in, which I think like sensor fusion here, like what, Oppo and Xiaomi and who is it? Huawei are doing would really, really help, but they're not doing that. So there is some room for improvement. But I think if you buy this phone today, I think it's just as solid as like a Samsung or a OnePlus or a Pixel, like it's no iPhone, but iPhone's in a different world anyway, right? And I don't mean that the iPhone's better than these phones. I'm just saying that it's a different ecosystem, so you're not even going to cross compare. So yeah, that's my take on that phone. I like it. Read my review. It's on Hot Hardware. I'll link it in the show notes. But, I want to see them succeed. That's why the Razr coming up is something I'm excited about, because I feel like if they nail the Razr as well, we really have Moto back, especially after the Think phone, right? You've played with that too, haven't you?
Just a little bit. They didn't actually send me one, even though I thought they were. I think it's a fine phone, but I think overall their phone business is on the upswing, especially if they market the Razr effectively, which I think they're going to, because if you look at what they've done setting up for this launch. For example, I live in San Diego and they're a big sponsor of the Padres. And it used to say Motorola or Moto in the outfield. Now it says Razr. So they're very focused on the Razr branding. And I think they're going to do a really big push once they actually launch it.
Look, I'm super excited. I think we're going to be very, very excited when we see this product. First of all, there's two versions. That's the rumors. And if there are two models, that's very good, because let's say one is $1,000, matching Samsung with the Flip. What if the other one's $800, like $799, right? Yeah, sure, it might have a lesser processor. I'm speculating. It might have, rumors say it'll have a smaller front display, which, obviously the big front display means you can run full apps, which has been a thing on Moto Razrs before, right? But even if you could run like somehow something on that smaller front display, now we're talking about a phone that's much more accessible, right? To like a much larger swath of customers. And if the carriers are on board, holy crap balls. Hopefully not just Verizon. If Moto, you're listening, please don't just make a partnership with Verizon on this phone. Anyway, I think there's a lot of potential, and I've heard good things. So, yeah, keep your ears peeled, eyes peeled, ears. I don't know. There's an expression there, but I don't know. You saw that we have some leaks around the specs of the more expensive model, and I'll link that in the show notes as well. There's nothing too spectacular here, but we see that the camera system supposedly is 12 megapixel f/1.5. Very interesting. OIS as well. Interesting that they didn't go to a 50 megapixel, but also interesting that they went f/1.5 and large pixels, 1.4 microns or something, and that they have OIS on, when you consider the Oppo folding flip phone, doesn't have OIS, does have Hasselblad branding, which I don't see. Yeah, I have one too. I have the purple one. I just don't understand how they could Hasselblad could let Oppo put Hasselblad branding on a phone that doesn't have OIS. Like, I'm totally on board. Like, the quality, this is definitely the best camera on a flip phone so far that I've tested, the Oppo. But I feel like, how did you not put OIS on there? How? Like, come on. I know you can do a lot with electronic stabilization, but in low light, you need to open that shutter. And that vexes me so hard.
I'm hoping that the rumors are wrong about the Wi-Fi 6. And I hope that it is Wi-Fi 7, because if this phone's launching at the end of the year, next year's going to be a big year for Wi-Fi 7. And I think as people's refresh cycles start to lengthen, I think having Wi-Fi 7 is going to be important, at least for flagship devices.
You're talking about the Razr?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's got supposedly a Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. So does that have Wi-Fi 7?
I don't think it has it by default, but I think the Wi-Fi chipset can be capable.
Yeah, but that more room, more real estate on a phone that's really already like, has challenges with real estate in terms of circuit board and stuff. Look, the Edge Plus that I reviewed has a Wi-Fi 7. So Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, of course. That makes sense. I don't think it's critical for people. Like the average person won't even care. Like they're just browsing the web on Wi-Fi. And it's not like they're transferring 4K video, 3 hours of it. This is not the phone they're going to do 4K video for 3 hours with.
Yeah, I just think Wi-Fi 7 brings a lot more than just speed, which is why I'm about it, right? Because you get all 3 bands simultaneously. You get better coverage, better battery life. It's everything everybody wanted from Wi-Fi 6 that they never got because they never changed their access points.
True. No, I get that. But I'm just saying, like, I don't think the Razr is the product for that. I think that the Razr next year will be the product for that. You know what I'm saying? Like, one Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 2, if it ever happens, comes out or something, right? We'll see. But look, I think Moto's onto something. I'm just like, wow. Like, I still want the Moto Gs to be better, but,
Sure.
Better in terms of value. Like, they're not bad phones in the absolute, but once you put a price tag next to those phones, you go like, come on, guys, you can do better. And that's only because, Realme and Redmi and Poco exist, right? But of course, in South America, where most of their phones are sold, and I guess North America is doing really well on prepaid with these phones too. But at least in South America, I don't know if they have Realme and Redmi and Poco. Anybody in the comments, let me know, because I follow India and lots of other markets, but South America is a bit of a mystery to me. You know anything about that?
I don't. I have not seen what those companies are doing in the Southern Americas.
So yeah, I'm excited. Speaking of these brands, we have a few interesting new phones from Realme. The 11 Pro Plus is what I'm excited about. There was an actual event in New York that I was invited to where they were going to show us the phone. And I will link to Ben Sin, who, like you, sometimes writes for Forbes. Ben Sin is, mostly known for being at XDA and has a great YouTube channel where he gets all the phones from Hong Kong because he spends half his time in Hong Kong. And he had, the phone obviously in New York for a little bit and played with it and did a little hands-on. This is exciting because this is a 200 megapixel phone with OIS on a $300 price tag, essentially. I mean, it's probably going to be a little more when it finally comes out because I think the big launch is coming up in June. So, and of course, it's got that crazy leather back. It's fake leather, of course, but it's really premium looking. And they're bringing some kind of, it's a parent company is Oppo here. So, BBK Group. So they're bringing in a bunch of that technology in, which I think is great. And this is a proper Samsung ISOCELL HP3. This is not just some random OmniVision crappy 200 megapixel. This is a decent sensor, although really small pixels on that. I think it's 0.6 microns. But
I'm surprised that they went Dimensity 7000 series with it.
But I'm not. I think we haven't seen too many phones with that yet. And I feel like this is probably Are you surprised because of the price point, or are you surprised because you wanted something more?
I was hoping maybe a tier higher, like 8000 series.
Right. Well, $300, right? So,
yeah.
Oof. And it does use in-sensor cropping, which is available on some of the 200 megapixel sensors, which means that it can do things like 4:1 zoom that is quote-unquote lossless simply because it's no longer binning. But then in low light, of course, you suffer a little bit. That's why the OIS exists, right? But it's interesting. To me, I'm just excited because, like, you have to understand the history of the Pro Plus on the numbered Realme phones. The 10 Pro Plus didn't have OIS, but had a 108 megapixel Samsung sensor and did in-sensor cropping 3x. And I played with it briefly. I took it with me to, I want to say Denver or Phoenix for a car thing and used it for the weekend. And I took some incredible 3x shot. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is like Samsung Galaxy S22 worthy at the time. That was the best you could get in terms of 108 megapixel sensors. And I'm like, on a $300 phone, holy crap. But it didn't have OIS. And prior to that, the Realme 9 Pro Plus had the ubiquitous and awesome Sony IMX766. that is in the like many flagships from 2022. And it had that with OIS, and it kicked ass because it had a really good 50 megapixel sensor, right? So this whole line of, again, I kind of feel like the next company we're talking about, which is, Oppo here, which is also BBK Group, how every 6 months they seem to have a new Realme lineup with like a numbered phone and a numbered Pro and a numbered Pro Plus. And this is the 11 Pro Plus. I can't wait to get my hands on it. I don't know about you, Anshul, but I get really hot and bothered by affordable phones that have good imaging. Like, give me a phone that costs $300 and where the normal experience is fine, but then the camera experience is like, wow. And I'm on board. And very few companies are doing that. OnePlus never did that. They were more like general overall value, right? But Realme somehow manages to do that. Like in the same way as their flagship charges a 240 watt, right? It's like crazy.
I think it has something to do with volume and potentially purchasing components as a, when they're buying them for manufacturing across multiple brands, they might be able to get better pricing than other brands that might not be moving as many sensors. That's something to consider. But I think it's also a priority, right? Like, what are they prioritizing as a brand? And a lot of people still care about what their camera capabilities are, even at the $300 price point.
Yeah, especially in markets like India and stuff where these phones are, like competing like head to head with like other brands like Poco and Redmi that are, kind of sister brands actually, but that doesn't matter because they all have their own lineups and stuff. Even though the phones, if you look at them, are essentially like reskinned versions of one another. But still, like, I think this is what this phone is about. And there's also an 11 Pro and an 11 regular. Those are slightly detuned. The 11 Pro has a 100 megapixel sensor. Wait, do we know of a company making a 100 megapixel sensor? I've never heard of 100.
It's probably a
megapixels.
108, right?
Huh. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. And the prices, again, are a little lower. You still get that fake leather back. And I don't know. I'm kind of excited that Realme seems to be like the new OnePlus to me from the BBK Group. They're just like the insolent child that just decides to make whatever they come up with in their heads and just does it and then sees how it lands. And seems to land pretty well because they're still in business. I don't know. What do you think?
I think you're right. It doesn't really seem like OnePlus is trying to serve that segment anymore.
No, I think the difference between OnePlus and Realme is that Realme is not only pursuing value, they're pursuing niche as well, right? Like this $300 super camera phone was never something OnePlus did. It's something that Poco does sometimes, and Xiaomi, Redmi does sometimes. Oppo does it sometimes. The Reno series. It's just not something we see from OnePlus. OnePlus has always tried to deliver a very well-rounded package, and dropping a few little things that drop the price down, like, lack of NFC in the OnePlus 2, that was a mistake, and lack of wireless charging on the OnePlus 11 5G. You know what has wireless charging and costs $100 more? The Moto Edge Plus 2023. So I don't think they should have done that. That's just my opinion, though. Anyway, I'm excited about this
NFC and wireless charging are not very expensive.
No, that's my point, right? Realme 11 series, check it out. I'll have some links in the show notes. Related to that, we now also have the Oppo Reno 10 series, only for China right now. But I want to pick your brain about this. Like, how sustainable do you think it is, both for a company's business, but also for the environment? Because this is crazy. Just like the Realmes that come out every 6 months, like clockwork, because I got the 10 Pro Plus, which is a predecessor to this 11 Pro Plus, like in November. So 6 months ago, or 8 months ago. And then, the Reno 9 was announced in November, and the Reno 10 series is now available from Oppo. And I've had every single Reno, but I stopped at 8 because I couldn't keep up. Like, I stopped requesting them with the 9 because I'm like, I've had every single Reno, higher end Reno series phone since day one. How can they make money changing these phones every 6 months? And more importantly, is this good for the environment with all these phones? Do you think they just make half the number that they would if they made a yearly release, or what?
I think when you consider their business model, it's difficult to understand how they're able to make money. But I think really what it is there was a certain speed by which the ecosystem was moving. And I think they were trying to, stay ahead of the game. But I think as people's refresh cycles start to slow, even in China, we might actually see them slowing down with this cadence. Especially when you look at Oppo dropped their custom silicon division, right? So they're looking for ways to cut costs. And I have a feeling that the only reason why we're still seeing these every 6-month cadences is because somebody thinks that the competition is going to run away with innovation if they don't. But I think if the companies start to realize that, they don't need 2 phones a year, that'll probably save them a lot of money, and they'll actually probably be able to make a lot of good margin on these devices towards the end of its life cycle when, costs are optimized and processes are optimized and, they've been able to market the product effectively. So I think this will probably possibly change down the road as these companies are looking for ways to save money. Because to your point, development is expensive, and having a new phone every 6 months is kind of wasteful.
Yeah, that's kind of my take. And I feel like also the other thing to consider is, it's confusing to customers. It's like, you remember when HTC was launching dozen phones a year, in North America, or back in the heyday, or 10 years ago, people would be like, I don't know which phone to pick. I don't even know which one is the latest or which one is the best, right? And I think that kind of muddies the waters. And maybe in markets like India, it doesn't matter because they wait for the discounted model. They wait the 6 months and they get a Reno 9 today that's discounted because the Reno 10 is coming out. Maybe that's the strategy. I don't know. They can get rid of inventory that way. But
has the Reno 9 even launched globally yet?
Yes, I think so, but I'm not sure. See, this is my point. Even I don't know, and I follow this stuff. So this is I'm not trying to pick on Oppo here. I love Oppo. I think they're doing some cool stuff, but it seems the cadence is just too fast, even for somebody like me. So,
as the meme would say, "Daddy chill."
Daddy chill, yeah. So the Reno 10 Pro Plus is obviously the one you're looking at. This one is pretty high end. It's also priced pretty high end, even for China. You're looking at $600, right? That in China, that's subsidized in China by all the apps and systems and ecosystem play and things. So this is really pretty much like we're looking at a $700 US phone, right? So we're looking at almost a flagship, a premium. I mean, it's Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1. So there you go. And then it's got super nice OLED LTPO, higher res than HD, but lower res than Quad HD, which we're starting to see on some phones, even in the Poco, for example, latest Poco F5 Pro, which I have here, which is a flagship from Poco with 8 Plus Gen 1 wireless charging and the whole shebang. This is kind of the same deal here. The thing that also I want to point out, we were talking about Moto earlier and Realme. It vexes me that Moto doesn't make any phones in that price point and that mid-range that is got an OLED. Look at all these phones. Even the Realme has an OLED 120 hertz display, right? 1080p. All these Oppos have it too. There used to be a time when the lower end of the range had an LCD at 120 hertz, but now in China, in India, all these phones, anything over $300 is an OLED now. And, that's the way it should be. I know some people prefer the LCD because of the, low intensity PWM refresh issues and slicker stuff. I get that. But I think it's clear to me it's a superior experience for 90% of the world out there. So I'm happy to see really high-end displays on these phones. And, 100 watt. I mean, to me, I read these specs and I think to myself, this is a OnePlus 11 with a periscope telephoto, which the OnePlus 11 doesn't have, and a slightly lesser processor. That's basically what I'm looking at here when I see this Reno 10 Pro Plus, especially at that price. So, there's a 10 Pro, there's a 10. I'll link in the show notes. You can check it out on your own. Interesting. Will we see them in the West? Probably just India, really. Typically what happens, I don't think the Renos are even sold in Europe. They were at the beginning, but well, now Oppo is kind of banned in Germany, so I don't know.
Oh yeah, that was like an IP thing, right?
Yeah, there's some kind of patent infringement going on there. Speaking of our good friends that used to be at BBK Group, Carl Pei has some news. He actually officially mentioned the size of the battery on the Nothing Phone 2. And oh, I know, it's like, look, I only picked this, just so you know, Anshel, because I know my audience is really keen on the Nothing Phone 2, just as I am, because it's coming to North America, but also because, you know, it's typical X1 Plus current Nothing marketing strategy of like piecemeal revealing specs, right? Like we went to MWC and we heard it'd be an 8th gen kind of phone. And then, oh, somebody at Qualcomm dropped the ball and leaked quote unquote that it was an 8 Plus Gen 1, right? Is that a proper leak or not, right? Then we found out, you know, that the teaser shot, then a 4,700 milliamp hour battery, which is a little low in my opinion, considering most phones these days are 5,000. Now, we know it has wireless charging and that takes up space and probably all that gimmicky. And I don't mean that in a negative way because I think it's cool, but I think we could do without the whole, you know, light show in the back is taking up some space too. So I get it. As long as, I mean, with the 8 Plus Gen 1, it'll be fine. As long as they do the software properly. But it's interesting, right? Like, I'm really excited this phone is coming to the US officially. And I don't know if you saw this news really kind of flew under the radar. Kyle Kang, who used to be the marketing head at OnePlus and is the guy responsible for the T-Mobile partnership with OnePlus, is come on board at Nothing to be the North American marketing chief.
I wonder what carrier they're going to launch with.
I hope all three. I think, look, the only way you're going to get a phone off the ground in North America today is you can't have exclusives. This is not going to work anymore. People are not accepting of that anymore. I don't know if they can pull it off. It'll be T-Mo if it's anybody, honestly.
I think the one thing people have to remember is it costs money, a lot of money, to launch on US carriers, and some carriers are more expensive than others. And I think if you look at how OnePlus has moved around along with their carrier compatibility and carrier exclusivity, I think that kind of gives you a good idea of what the costs are and how difficult it is to actually launch on all three carriers. And I think to your point, I would absolutely love to see them in all three carriers, but I think if they're going to land on one, it'll probably be T-Mobile.
But it can't be an exclusive. They have to sell it unlocked at the same time.
I agree.
So let's see. And you know, if it's not going to be Verizon, they're never going to put millimeter wave on this thing. And Verizon at this level of spec will want millimeter wave. And that's part of the problem. It's like millimeter wave is essentially dead in the water at this point. Now that UW on, you know, ultra wide band on Verizon also includes C-band, like you can't even make the distinction on your phone anymore. It used to be very clear. It was UW, it was millimeter wave, it was awesome. Now you're getting 300 megabits. Oh, I'm on C-band, you know? And it's like hard to tell anymore when you're just walking around town. Am I on millimeter wave? You know, you see the UW light up and you're like, oh, I'm on C-band. You know, you're like, oh no. You know, it's like, so I love Verizon. Don't get me wrong. They're doing some good stuff. Their coverage is great. The network performance is good. The prices are too high. And this whole obsession with millimeter wave, I don't think the technology is bad. I just don't think there's no value proposition there. And I might be wrong.
I disagree, but I would say that I think millimeter wave should be a tail end technology, not a leading technology for 5G.
So they should force it on all the phones.
Definitely not.
But they do. They do on anything that's, you know, more than $500. Even the Google Pixel 7a has a different version for Verizon with millimeter wave.
I have an AT&T variant.
Yeah, I'm getting a T-Mobile one because apparently Google's not giving out review units except to like 5 publications that got it ahead of launch. I have not heard anything from their PR people or Team Pixel. And, you know, T-Mo was like, hey, we can send you one. And I'm like, oh, I'm in Canada right now. Can you send it to Canada? And they're like, yeah. And then they're like, no. And so I got to wait till I'm back in San Francisco in about 2 weeks, maybe. It's fine. At this point, this is a phone I'm excited about, but it's not critical anymore. I hate to say that because it's such a milestone. At $499, those specs are insane. You're talking about that Moto earlier, the Edge Plus at $799. Oh, it's a different dimension, right? You're getting a much better processor, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. I'll take that over Tensor any day of the week. But at the same time, if you're on a budget, you cannot go wrong with Pixel 7a at $499. Holy crap, it's such value.
And that's before Google starts discounting it.
Oh my God. And the 7 right now is discounting pretty hard. So anyway, I want to talk with you about something that's going to happen next week. I think it'll be in 2 weeks, actually, that we'll cover
2 weeks. I was just going to correct you.
Yeah. And basically, it's the VR, AR, XR headset from Apple that is being rumored to be announced on June 5th. So Reality Pro is what it's called. You are an XR, VR, AR expert. What do you think is going to happen here? Some people are saying they can't launch it. It's not ready. Some people are saying they should launch it because it's a dev conference. They need the developers on board. And there seems to be conflicting ideas about what it will deliver, who it's for, what it's about. Some people are saying it's an iPad in your face. What's your take? Just You've been following this more than me. Educate my audience as to what we know that's fact.
What we know that's fact is actually very little. So I think that's why you have such a broad array of opinions.
Yeah.
The reality is that Apple has to launch this device. They've been developing it for probably the last 7 or 8 years. And I know for a fact that they were supposed to have launched this sooner. The expectation was, I think, maybe 2 years ago. So this has been something that's been dragging on. So that's part of the problem here, that they need to get it out the door. Apple hasn't necessarily been one of those companies that rushes things out the door. They've been traditionally a company that has taken its time with launching products because that's what people expect of them. But at a certain point, they need to get this thing out the door. And the expectation is this will be a mixed reality device. So what that means is that it will be both VR and AR, and it will allow you to kind of bridge the spectrum between them. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that when we're talking about these different types of AR, VR, XR, MR, whatever, it's essentially a spectrum. And the very end of the spectrum is real reality, and then you have virtual reality, and then everything in between. And what Apple's trying to do is create a headset that allows you to experience VR, which is full immersion, but also experience AR, which is augmented digital world on top of the real world. And the reason why they can't do full AR right away with glasses like you're wearing is because the physics of optics, as well as the capabilities of battery technology, processors, and cooling is just not there yet. And one of the big problems is field of view. So they have to build an actual VR headset that has pass-through technology, which gives you AR through the VR headset's cameras. So that's why you're going to have this pair of goggles that will look like a VR headset, but might have AR capabilities. And if you look at a lot of the AR headsets that are out today, or VR headsets, that's a lot of what they're doing now, is a lot of these pass-through capabilities. Even the PSVR has some of that capability, even though it's very much not a mixed reality headset. It uses mixed reality to make it easier for you to transition from full reality into virtual reality by giving you that middle ground. So that's what I think Apple's going to do. They're going to kind of usher you into virtual reality through mixed reality, and you're going to spend a lot of your time in mixed reality. And to the questions that you had, there's going to be productivity applications, so you're going to have that iPad on a face-like experience, but that's because they want you to actually feel like the money you're spending, which this is expected to be in the thousands of dollars range, upwards of $3,000 is the rumor. If it's going to be that expensive, it needs to be able to do things, right? It can't just be a singular application. It needs to be able to do all the things you would expect your iPad to do, your MacBook, and then some. And that's because it's expensive. But also, when people transition to a new platform, that platform has to be able to do all the things that their previous platform did. So that's why you're getting a lot of these conflicting signals about what it's going to be able to do. It needs to be able to do a lot of the things that you would do on other Apple devices, but it also needs to do things that you can only do on the headset. And some of those things are going to be, like doing a full virtual FaceTime in photorealistic quality with somebody else, or being able to do VR workouts, on the face of the moon, right? Like Supernatural already does that on the Quest. So there's going to be some really niche applications that Apple owns that will only be able to be possible on this headset. But then there will be a lot of other things where they up level. So like, for example, maybe you can connect your MacBook to it and it'll give you 3 virtual screens. Things like where it up levels the experience, makes the value of the headset more acceptable, even though I think their market with this first headset is developers first. Then it's going to be enthusiasts of the Apple ecosystem. And then, people who are curious about what the headset's about, that have the money to spend.
Or VR, AR, XR, MR enthusiasts too, right?
Absolutely.
Like
I'm going to have to get one myself just because I have to have that comparison. I have all the other headsets here too. But yeah, I think it's a low volume product, honestly, on purpose, because I think they want to limit the people who are going to have it up front right away. And I think they really want to make sure that developers have it in hand, because they're going to have subsequent headsets that are going to be cheaper. And they want to make sure that developers understand how to build for this platform and have access to a headset that has the full stack of software. And then down the road, when they're trying to reach a more mass market, they'll already have a really deep bench of applications that people know and love and or are excited about, that they can actually go and use with that more accessible headset.
Right. I mean, I have no doubt that involving the Apple developer, community, is the way to go. Like, they are the strongest community for development, for early development out there. Software is one of the things Apple does super well in terms of integrating developer support, et cetera, et cetera. So I think all of this, I have no doubt the software, it'll be solid and polished. I'm just trying to figure out, is there anything Apple's going to bring to the hardware that differentiates this from a Quest Pro or standalone Vive, whatever that might be, because I don't keep track. But I'm just saying, they must have something that is making them go out there and say, okay, we're ready now. Because the market is unlike the Apple Watch, which also started very iffy, right? It wasn't until Gen 2 or 3 even that we really hit their stride, right? Even with the iPhone, it wasn't until they added 3G. I'd say the iPhone 4 was really the key moment where Apple really nailed it. And I think all of that is always the case, right? iPad was the same, right? But I think with this, it's not a clear consumer tech, right? It's not like you're an early adopter. You do Supernatural out on the moon, and you do other stuff with it. But the average person like me, I still struggle because I wear glasses. Like, every time I put a headset on, I get sweaty, I get hot, I get fogged up, I can't see properly. Yes, some of them have incredible quality displays and high refresh rates, but I still never feel comfortable. And I think, that's why to me it's not a consumer product yet, because it needs to be reduced in size and weight and everything. And so I'm wondering, does Apple have something you think is going to be like, aha, we're getting into the consumer realm of what AR, VR, XR, MR can do?
I'm not sure that will be readily apparent with the first device.
Okay.
I think, one of the key killer features they're supposedly going to be having with this XR device, which, by the way, the rumor is it's going to be called XROS, is that dial like you have on the Apple Watch, where you would be able to, that crown, so you can dial in reality or dial it out.
Oh, cool.
So that's I think, a big feature that they're looking to use. But also, this might be the first headset without actually using controllers, is my understanding. So it might actually be all hands and all voice. So it's going to use hand tracking, it's going to use voice tracking, and it's also going to use eye tracking. So you might even be able to do things without even using your hands, and just by looking at objects and selecting them with your eyes, which actually the PSVR does now. But I think eye tracking is going to be a big component of how a lot of these headsets improve user experience without having the need of controllers, but also improving performance, improving battery life, and creating new user interfaces that didn't exist before.
Well, let's see what happens. I'm excited for once about VR, XR, AR, It's rare that I am, but I have hopes that perhaps we can see a glimmer of what the average user, once it goes down to $1,000 or less, will be able to enjoy. And to me, the most compelling thing you're describing so far is 3 displays from my MacBook, and that ability to dial in so I can see the keyboard if I need to. I know like you could do a virtual keyboard, but I'm physically touching it, and sometimes I need to reposition my hands or whatever, use the trackpad, whatever it might be. We'll see how it goes.
HTC already does that with their headset. You can kind of you get to choose if you want a virtual keyboard or if you want to actually see your keyboard. Their headset's super light. So I think if Apple does something, I think their headset's going to look more like HTC's than it will look like Quest.
Cool. We have a limited time left, but I want to bring up this really interesting sudden news from yesterday. By the way, we're recording this today on May 26th, a Friday. So this is fresh news. It is that basically Ford's going to be adopting Tesla's charging connector, the North American Charging Standard, it's called. Because Tesla's been talking since the early days when they released this connector that they were going to open source it, make it available, patent and royalty free to others. And it never really happened until last year. And so, if you don't follow EVs, there's basically in North America 2 standards. There's a Tesla standard and ACS, and there's CCS, which is a worldwide standard, but actually has a different connector for North America than the rest of the world. And then China has its own thing. Japan used to have its own thing, but that's going away, called CHAdeMO. So the reality is if you buy a Tesla, you get that connector and you get supercharger network, which is very expansive and all over the place and frictionless and plentiful and fast and I wouldn't say affordable, but it's seamless. It's frictionless, and it works with that connector. And then if you have another EV from another company, you use CCS and you use other networks like Electrify America or EVgo, etc. And it's a bit more friction because not all cars support plug and charge, which is where you plug, and it automatically bills you in the back end. You don't have to pull out a phone or a credit card to pay. In fact, superchargers don't have a display or a control unit on the charging point, whereas CCS chargers all do, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, the supercharging network is a superior technology simply because of its connector and its plentifulness and its reliability and its less lack of friction. With Ford saying we're going to adopt this, I think this is a big step in the right direction. I think it gives a signal to the industry that CCS in North America is flawed, which I've always said it was. I don't think this standard should become a world standard. I think Europe is well served by CCS. Their CCS is actually slightly less unwieldy than our CCS, to be honest with you, even though it's very similar. It's not ideal, but it works, and I think we should leave it alone. But in North America, I think this is a good thing, and having a company like Ford jump in and say, we support this, we're behind it, is a huge deal. And it hopefully means some other big car manufacturers will follow. The way it's going to work is that Ford is initially going to provide an adapter so that if you have an existing Ford EV, you can plug an adapter into your existing CCS port and plug in a NACS supercharging cable into it without having to use one of those new superchargers that has compatibility with CCS. There is 12 of them in the US out of that's a drop in the bucket compared to the number of superchargers. But most importantly, future cars, I think, starting with 2025 models or so, will have the connector from Tesla or the NACS connector in there. And will they also have CCS? I don't know. We don't know that yet. But the thing people are not talking about, I think is really important here, is that it's not just a connector issue. This means that, because right now, if you build an adapter to plug your Ford F-150 into a supercharger, it wouldn't charge. It just wouldn't do it. Because there's communication happening. It talks to the Tesla backend using APIs. It, for billing, for all this other stuff, for planning your route, all of that is now going to be integrated. That's, I think, the big news here. The adapter is nice for people who already have a Ford EV, but it's a stepping stone. I think to me, this means one big car maker, Ford, old car maker, one of the biggest, most well-known, is saying, we want our users to have the best experience. And to do that, we're partnering with Tesla. And we're using not only the new connector in the long run, but we're using their backend, the billing, the navigation and routing functionality so that in Ford Sync, in your F-150 Lightning, you will see the superchargers. You'll be able to pick one, and it will bill you automatically on your credit card on file, on your Ford Sync app. This, to me, is how it should be. And that's the big news, in my opinion. Your thoughts?
First of all, as a former Tesla owner, I don't think there's a remotely good charging network that can compete with it. And if the Biden administration is as serious about getting EVs uptaking as much as they want to, I think they have to embrace this and encourage it. And I think Ford, to your point, is clearly understanding that they're not going to beat Tesla at this game, and it's in their best interest to work with Tesla to improve the infrastructure and to improve the user experience. And if I'm looking at buying an EV and I don't want to buy a Tesla, I definitely am going to want at least to have one that has a Tesla connector on it. So I think Ford is making the right move here. I think it would be interesting if they had multiple connectors on the vehicle, maybe one on one side, one on another.
Correct.
Which we know is possible and has happened on other vehicles. And that's an added cost, but I think it might actually improve the user experience in some ways. As someone who has a Tesla, I would love to have had a connector that wasn't just the Tesla connector for all the non-Tesla chargers that were out there, and I didn't have to use the adapter because I actually had my adapter stolen by a valet once. So, not needing an adapter is great. And yeah, I just think this is, the Teslas are kind of the best chargers in terms of speed too, which I think is a big factor. On my Model 3, I had 250 kilowatt charging, and there were actually times where I got 250 kilowatts. So
I get it all the time. Like it's incredible now. Like if I'm preconditioned properly, every time, below 50% charge, I'm getting, 1100 miles per hour charging, which is basically like slightly higher than 250. Usually it's 254 or so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think having, the reality is today, charge networks are not really supposed to be your primary charging solution. It's supposed to be a backup. I didn't have that choice in the last 6 months of ownership of my Tesla, but I think that it's just people need to know that there's a reliable network out there that they can charge quickly and move on with their life. And at this point, Tesla is the only solution for that. So I think Ford is making the right move. And if any other OEMs in the US follow suit, it will pretty much solidify it is as the North American charging standard.
I mean, right now, if you ignore Tesla for a second, if you hate them, I get it. Like Elon's a jerk. Like I understand that. I still love my car. I still love my car because I love my experience. I love the technology. I don't have the self-driving, but I love the autopilot. It's still better than anything else, in my opinion. Still works in more circumstances. I still love the way the car drives. I still love the performance and the value I get. Yes, the interior is not well made. There's a lot of issues, but I still love the car. And a lot of it comes down to the charging experience. I don't charge at home. Both places I live, I can't charge at home. So for me, I'm always relying on the public networks. And yes, sometimes I charge level 2, but most of the time it's just frictionless. I just go to the nearest supercharger and bang, I'm done in like 20 minutes. I'm done. It's just magic. And on this most recent trip, as I mentioned on last week's podcast, between Vancouver and San Francisco, in the past, I used to kind of know which stations I was going to end up at, because I kind of knew the ones. I didn't care this time. I just let the car do its thing. And then when I felt a little uncomfortable about its predictions, I'd be like, where's the nearest supercharger? I want to do a detour and go there now. And I did. And every time, 250 kilowatt, it would prioritize those. Every time I'd get there, there was a spot. It would prioritize the ones that had less cars. It does magical things on the software level that other car manufacturers are not even remotely capable of doing right now, which is why I think Ford forget the connector, just that alone, and that the built-in billing, which I know Ford already has with, the Ford charging network through their partnership with Electrify America, etc. But they do it so much better. 1/4 of the time that I use an Electrify America charger, that I'm reviewing another car right now, I have problems charging. or the charger is full because I'm in California when I review cars and there's so many EVs now. This never happens. I've owned a Tesla for 5 years now, 2 of them in a row, and I've only had to wait 5 minutes twice, and just 5 minutes at a busy charger. I've never had a problem. I've had 2 faults happen, and they were actually indicated on the display. I didn't read the display, and I picked the wrong stall number, and I had a faulty charger. Like in 5 years, I have charged over 100 times. I used to do Portland to San Francisco like every month, you know? It's just been flawless for me, all but flawless. You know, yeah, there are some issues sometimes, but very rarely. And so you compare that to Electrify America and you're like, okay, this is a no-brainer, right? So if you're a Ford customer right now, or if you're an EV customer who doesn't want a Tesla, I get it. And you're looking at the landscape out there and you're like me, you can't charge at home and you want to do road trips. Honestly, Ford is like going to be like my number 2 choice at this point, because I'm like, it solves this problem. And so if I was Volkswagen or, you know, GM right now, or Hyundai and Kia, which I think are the more accessible brands, right? I would be like, hey, we need to jump in on this too. And I would make it happen. And the moment another one does that, another company jumps in with Tesla on this charging thing, I tell you, it's game over for CCS in North America. I'm telling you now, it'll continue existing. There'll be adapters, but you're going to see everyone switch over, right?
I think you're right. I really think it's over if another OEM joins.
And it still might be over with just Ford, because Ford's going to start selling a lot more cars on this. I'm telling you now.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to a few Ford owners yesterday empirically, and they're like, holy crap. Like, it's like, you know, I hit the jackpot. Like, it's just like suddenly like, I don't have to worry about rage anxiety ever again. And I'm like, I totally understand that. And you win. And I'm on board with you. Like, as a Tesla owner, I'm not mad that the Ford people are coming. This is great. This is what we need for the EV ecosystem to evolve. And so anybody who's mad about this NACS thing, come on, let's just let it go. Okay. Like, we don't live in a perfect world right now. It's a mess out there. You know, just because this one guy is a jerk doesn't mean that the companies he runs, some of them, are not doing good stuff, because they are. Some of them, not many, but some of them. So, you know, this is a kind of a paradox we live with today. And I think I'm willing to accept that. So there you go. Final thoughts?
I'm happy to have joined you. And, you know, I love talking about EVs and I love talking about phones and XR. So you pretty much hit all the topics I love to talk about. And I actually currently don't have a car for myself. So I'm quietly watching the market and seeing, you know, what's available and what's transpiring. And this makes me want to wait and see what happens with other makers and what future models Ford has. Because honestly, as somebody who used to have a Tesla for 3 years, I love that network and I wouldn't really trust any other. Yeah.
Well, on that thought, let's wrap up. And do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, your various social media handles, and where your writings can be found and stuff?
Yes, so I'm at Anshel Sag on every possible social media platform, with the exception of Blue Sky. I'm not on there yet. And then I write for Forbes. I also write for RCR Wireless, and I'm kind of all over the place, but you can pretty much find all my stuff on my social media. And yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Always a pleasure, Anshel. And folks, if any of you out there have a Blue Sky invite or two for me and Anshel, please ping me privately. I am trying to get on there. But in the meantime, for better or for worse, Twitter is still the place where you should chat with me and Anshel about this podcast. At Tankgirl is my handle. That's TNKGRL, just like Tankgirl, the comic book. Just drop the vowels and you get my handle. And that's my handle on Instagram as well. So, you know, chat with us on Twitter. Check out my Insta for pretty pictures of cars, of phones, of tech, of food, of travel, all taken with phones. Check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/mobiletechpodcast. You know how YouTube works. Like, subscribe, tell your friends, click the little bell below. Comment in YouTube about the podcast if you want to. It's really about supplemental visual content for the podcast, so check that out. If you want to subscribe to the show, mobiletechpodcast.com. We're on all the major podcasting apps, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Pocket Cast, etc. So subscribe and tell your friends, all that good stuff. Patreon is where it's at if you want to help me out. And I would love your support. So patreon.com/tankgirl, that's patreon.com/TNKGRL. The one big perk that a lot of people subscribe to is the video version of this podcast, which comes out a day or two ahead of the pre-public audio version, and that's on Patreon, one of the tiers there, so check that out. There's also access to our Discord server and a bunch of other perks, so consider Patreon if you want to support me financially, patreon.com/TNKGRL. And I want to thank NTT again for being our sponsor this week. NTT is one of the world's largest technology and business solutions companies, serving over 75% of the Fortune Global 100 and thousands of other clients globally, and has 85 million mobile subscribers in Japan. The company has a history of innovation with countless R&D initiatives that continue to push the boundaries of technologies, communications, computing, and human connection. Some examples include a focus on artificial intelligence, photonic networks, digital twin computing, quantum computing, cryptography, Open RAN, cellular networks, and immersive extended reality technologies. NTT's innovative optical and wireless network, IOWN, is a next-generation communications infrastructure initiative built on photonics and optical computing. IOWN has the potential to support and elevate highly advanced, low-latency technologies. And I want to thank you, Anshel, for being my guest yet again. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on. I always appreciate it.
We'll definitely have you on at some point in the future. And folks, we will have a podcast next week, so stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.